Thank you, and thank you for hosting me here. Thank you all for coming. I know it's the last lecture of the series, so I'm honored to take that position. I also know that there's free beer afterwards, so I'll try to keep it somewhat brief. Well, and thank you for introducing our firm, so I will not further expand on that. To be determined is the title of tonight's lecture, and you can see this sort of as the loose framework in which I will show 6 projects of our office. 6 recent projects, but because we also really started quite recently our firm, you can also see it as sort of the theme of basically the framework in which we have been working in the last 3 years since our inception. And to be determined can be read in 2 ways, can be understood as in 2 ways. On the one hand, to be determined, I think, represents our representation or determination to start a firm that is interested in the physical role or is interested in the architectural project as one that participates in society and actually creates physical environments. So a determination to build in a time when one can argue through, say, the economic crises that we are in, and also the sort of virtualization of our social space, the role of architecture really is often put into question. What do we actually bring to the table? But so our commitment to actually really set out an architectural agenda. At the same time, to be determined reflects our interest in systems and projects that are necessarily predetermined. So the idea of architecture as the introduction of a system of which the outcome itself is unknown, and where through participation or through site conditions actually the outcome does get determined. So we're not interested in an architecture that is highly specific formally. We're not interested in setting out something of which from the get-go we determine what it will be, but we're more interested in sort of introducing a process per project, of which the end result is not necessarily known or predicted from the beginning. So I will show 6 projects tonight, and I think that will give us some maybe further clarification of this theme. When we started our firm, for some reason, a lot of financial companies decided to go out of business. We started a month before Lehman Brothers went bankrupt, and in the US, our firm is based in Brooklyn, New York. There's a very direct relationship between the work there is for architects and the financial market, obviously here as well. But I think in a completely private condition, which is the US condition, this was immediately felt throughout the industry. So I think 50% of the architects in New York lost their job this year, and 1/3 of the offices needed to close. This was obviously, somebody said it's the worst time and the worst place and the worst profession to start a business. But at the same time, it really forced us to also think, what can we do as architects? What's the role of architecture? And it actually came as a blessing in a way, because it really has greatly influenced our architectural thinking. As you mentioned, I spent 8 years working at Sana during a very economically fruitful phase, and was able to finish some projects with them. But this was really sort of a change in the mood. And so we were wondering how can a profession which is about predicting certain outcomes, architecture, that we basically, our work consists of selling a future which is obviously always better than the current, and success in a way in architecture comes indeed if this future turns out the way we have predicted it to become. But our times, I think, are consistently unstable, consistently unpredictable, and because of that, whatever we try to sell as sort of a brighter future ultimately tends to turn out as a disappointment. And sort of the best moment in a way for the architectural project is either at the moment that say the design or the idea is revealed, or maybe it's even the day that it opens, but afterwards sort of the project in its importance diminishes. So we we were wondering, is there not a more, in a way, humble approach we can have as architects? Is there not a more contemplative mode? Can we not find also, say, a new beauty also in this instability? Can the uncertainty be used as the driver for the architectural project? So can we take on this uncertainty and actually turn it into an active participant in the architectural project? I think a first project that probably illustrates this best was the Young Architects program, or Young Architects Prize, which we did last year. It opened actually exactly a year ago, because tonight the next version is opening. MoMA, PS1. PS1 used to be an independent institute, but indeed, because they were not able to survive in our economic condition, had to be taken over by MoMA, a large museum, as you all might know, in New York. PS1 is their independent art space in Queens. They've existed for a while, and they have something called the Young Architects program. Every summer they ask 5 architects to come up with ideas to build an interior, or do an intervention in their courtyard. This is a quite barren courtyard, concrete wall with gravel. During the summer they have something they call the Urban Beach, the warm-up program, where there's DJs and events and stuff happening within this courtyard. And so every year they ask 5 architects to come up with an idea to dress this up, basically give this space an environment. This is one of the few chances as young architects actually have in New York to well, make their mark. And apart from the quite simple program, which is, you know, a party environment, there's a much larger challenge, which is basically sort of the question: where's your own architectural agenda? Where do you see that architecture should be heading? For the first time, the MoMA is always a little bit late, but they asked us also to deal with the issue of sustainability. So that was sort of added after 10 years as a thing we needed to address. For us, what was interesting is that the MoMA, in a way, represents and is the, say, beholder of the archive of you know, the modern movement, the idea of modernity, the idea of the ability to control our destiny is a very modern thought, and obviously the MoMA itself is also the one that actually brought modernism after the war to the US, and well, has been extremely instrumental in sort of the idea of modernity as a cultural force. And so we wanted to react to this idea of the modernist concept. So we wanted to also react to this to the basis, say, of the MoMA, and I will show a few slides that basically fed into our thinking. This is a dance called pole dance by Oskar Schlemmer, one of the Bauhaus choreographers, who was very interested in the relation between man and the environment and the spaces that we inhabit, the structures that we inhabit. We wanted to react to this idea of the systems that we inhabit by providing a system that is not rigorous, that is not stable, but something that is unstable, that is constantly being brought into motion, that is weak, basically a system upon we as individuals are actors. So our take was double. On the one hand, this idea of sort of a weak modernity that we are proposing here, and secondly, it's sort of a metaphor for our environment, and our answer also to this question of sustainability as a system that is constantly brought out of balance, on the verge of collapse, not by anything outside of ourselves. So we are the ones acting on this system. So it's a very simple grid system that is actually always on the verge of collapsing, and we ourselves as people are the ones that have to keep it stable. It consists of a series of poles, 5, what is it? I have to do the feet meter conversion. 30 feet, 10 meters, thank you. Poles, flexible glass fiber poles connected with bungee cords. They're sitting on surf mast bases, actually, so they're like a pin connection, constantly toppling over, and held together by a net. What we I'll speak about that aspect later. So this is basically the basic building block for this system. With this, we filled the entire courtyard on a Cartesian grid, and we inserted a number of activators, so basically places that are the interface between us, the user, and the system. Hammocks, a pool for cooling. There were pulleys and ropes, so basically a place with which where people could interact with this system. This was what we presented, and we presented also this scheme for the MoMA jury, because obviously something that is always on the verge of collapse will raise, especially in the US, a lot of questions about liability and such. So we made this image from a Rhino model, which had nothing to do with any structural engineering, and we put the Euro-Happold logo on it. And then we won. We ended up winning because this was sort of, they thought about it. So the next day we actually had to call Euro-Happold, and we said, congratulations, we won. And they asked, what did we win? We said, well, PS1, we have to build it. And we explained the system, and they said, there's actually absolutely no way that you can calculate this. There's no way we can predict what the outcome is. And which was, the essence of the idea, but it also created a lot of challenges. So the first thing they said is immediately tomorrow just build a mock-up and see if it works. So we ordered standard surf masts and standard bases, and it all looked sort of pretty promising and nice. So we said, well, this works. And then 2 days later, we got a phone call from MoMA, and he said, "That's great. Can you clean out the mess in the backyard?" Obviously, failure would also be part of the project itself, but this was a little bit too much of a collapse early on. Luckily, we were able to sort of continue to sort of fine-tune the system and create this environment. And I think for us it was really important also that it was never seen as an object, so it was always an interior. We basically covered the entire courtyard. It was a very much an interior experience. And the other aspect that I didn't spoke about in the beginning, which was really important to us, and also something that we are very interested in, is the role of the virtual within our current, the way we currently navigate space. And so it seems that one of the issues with sustainability is also the fact that we sort of care less about our physical realm because we're spending so much time in our virtual realm, and we thought, can we not learn from the what does the virtual what is so attractive about the virtual? And a number of issues that sort of have informed the scheme are obviously its playfulness, the fact that you as a user can sort of activate its environment, the social aspects, and we tried to see if we can get those things back into the physical. And so the balls that you see here, there are 3 colors, and they are actually used to stabilize the system. So they allow for the system to be sort of in balance, but at the same time they sort of suggest a game, but there are no rules. It sort of invites people to invent their own rules, to invent their own play. And what we saw, we really saw this thing as a sort of an infrastructure, or literally an infrastructure that people themselves could sort of take over and create their own projects and games and play within. So somebody said it's very beautiful, but we said it's not at all about beauty. Actually, it's really about sort of, does this thing work as a social activator? This was during the opening, and from above. This second part, sort of the virtual. So once we won, we got approached by Arab acoustical engineers, and after that also 2x4, which is a media group. And they came up with the suggestion to actually bring in an audio piece within this as well. So this represents the small courtyard, and 8 of the poles in there we actually embedded with sensors that could track the movement of the poles. And so the movement of the poles itself would trigger speakers. There were 8 speakers related to these poles, and you as a user could manipulate the sound that came out of this pole. And then we developed an iPhone application, which you see here. And with this, with your iPhone, you could then select one of these poles, you could select one of these speakers, and you could start to manipulate the type of sound that came out of the pole. And so you had people standing there shaking the pole and at the same time holding their iPhone trying to manipulate the sound that came out. And the sounds were composed such, the 8 were tonal sounds, so they would actually create a harmony together as well. And so people could create their own sound piece collectively, both in the physical and in the virtual realm. And once we had that data, which is basically a sort of a random data stream, we thought we can use it maybe for other things as well. There can also be a graphic representation of this movement, which then can be broadcast and used not only within this direct physical realm, but also outside of it. So you could, here you see the actual direct live feed of moving these poles. So you could call your mom and say, look, Mom, I'm here in the corner shaking, and she could go online or go on her iPhone to see you wherever you were. So it's also the idea that this thing happened in a very sort of specific local place, but at the same time it had sort of a life beyond. And when we then organized, so here you see sort of the thing at work, and the speakers you see up there in the corner. So we also had a dance group, and I will show a little bit of this afterwards. We actually were called by the American champion pole dancing, and she had a dance group called Body and Pole, and they did a performance in the space. We had no plan of this, but it was obviously the most sort of beautiful and active use of the space. We created this web environment, and there were like drawing contests, so people could make their own sort of most beautiful drawing. This was all posted online, and you could also, whatever pictures you took on your iPhone, you could immediately post on a Flickr page. This is Seoul, Korea, second project. We were asked to, we were approached by, this is a space for contemporary art in downtown Seoul. This is the the palace, or big city, and so here, which is the old part of the town, we were asked to build a contemporary arts space and also deal with their existing buildings. This is the third building we're doing for them. The neighborhood itself is characterized by sort of these old traditional Korean courtyard homes, but it's gradually being invaded by these larger galleries. Ms. Lee, our client, was one of the first invaders, actually. She was the first to go into this neighborhood, and she built her first building, a gallery building, and a second one. And we were asked to actually incorporate the two of them and build an additional space for contemporary art, a large single story, sort of big box, in which you could have larger installations. It's one of the main contemporary arts galleries, I would say, in Asia. And so it's quite prominent place and a very important commission for us, which came luckily quite early. What we're doing now is not only building this space, but also adjusting the first two and actually creating a sort of a total campus, connecting it. And we're now working on a little bookshop and cafe there in the corner. A very straightforward diagram, almost a sort of a Dutch diagram, I would say. Hard box, single box. Maximum amount of allowable space within this site. Circulation pushed out, so entrance, elevator down, and stairs to the roof. Underground, much more space, another gallery space, which is now turning into some sort of a lecture hall, and parking and storage, etc. And so the ground floor, the typical hard, white, modernist box with skylight from above. But so we felt we need to do something with this outer edge. We need to find a way in which this hard box actually can blend in much better within its much more fluid and historical, sort of fine-grained environment. And we took cues from, say, the traditional Korean, or sort of a Korean aesthetic. This is an actual drawing of the site. The site is right here. This is looking down from the mountain I took the other picture of, where there is sort of this permanent haze or fogginess. And one of the artists that they show, contemporary Korean photographers, also there is sort of this ambivalence and indeed sort of a lack of determination, so to say, within the imagery. And we thought, what if we take this hard box and in a way sort of wrap it in sort of a permanent fog, a permanent blur, a permanent soft edge. So we made this model and we wrapped it in this reflective stocking, basically elastic stocking to sort of soften the edge. And so this clear box would start to become much more undefined, and much less explicit, and much more fuzzy. We then had to get a permit, obviously, and the local government was very sensitive to this issue. And I think the diagram here in the bottom shows how contextual we are with our move. And so the project, the design got approved, and they said, so now go ahead, make it. But how do you do that? How do you wrap a box in sort of a permanent fog? It needed to be obviously strong because it was exterior. It needed to be metal in some way, but what can take on this form? And so we started to look at chainmail mesh, which is actually the only metal material that can take on double curvature in a very beautiful way. It can take on the shape of the body in a very beautiful way because of the way these rings are connected to one another. And this works on the scale of the body, and it's a very simple geometric working actually, but it does, it's literally, other than any weaves or other meshes that need pleating or needs seaming, this one really beautifully drapes in 3 dimensions. This is the largest scale commercially available, which is basically 1.3 centimeter diameter. But we needed to look at something larger for the scale, because this is for the scale of the body. It's used for butcher gloves and belly dancing gear. And for the scale of architecture, we needed to look at something larger. So what we did is we just laser cut and made this in our office to sort of testing the scale of what would be appropriate. And we started to explore the workings of this mesh. And how does it structurally and geometrically work? And we quickly found that there's a clear directionality. Actually, in one direction, it sort of falls straight and becomes very tight, whereas if you turn it, it has this elasticity and you can start stretching it. And so what we found out is what is visually the most sort of appealing amount of stretching that we could handle. And then we mapped the entire building, sort of say the height lines of the building, and so where does it stretch most and where does it needs to be the tightest. Then we approached the engineering firm, friends of us, and they helped us actually set up a process of how to also really start to engineer this, because this is obviously something we can't do ourselves. So we decided to have a physical trajectory and a trajectory through software, because this thing has never been engineered or thought about as an architectural project. So we really needed to be careful in thinking this through. So we did this parallel process. We started to do a very simple empirical testing of the structural forces and started to come up with some patterns of load lines through the mesh. We then mapped actually every single ring, and they at front were at some point so precise that they could really predict sort of the movement of the rings in like half a centimeter precision. This is a 1 to 10 scale mock-up we did in our office, which we actually are using really to count the rings. So we're using it actually for the order itself. And you see how here, for instance, this curved out area, there's no substructure or anything needed. Purely by stretching it, you actually get these geometries, such as here. And so what it also allows us to do is make a completely seamless building, because actually they're going to be welded together on site with the same within the pattern, and then we'll afterwards cut out the opening. So we tie them to the frames, and then we just burn out the openings where the mesh is not needed. We had to think also of how to install this mesh because it's a very tight site, so we really had to think it through. So we came up with a system of how this thing could be installed with pulleys up and sort of welded together on site. And so then we thought, now we know so much about this, are we going to write specifications for somebody else to install this and get this, or isn't it much easier if we just get it ourselves? And so we decided to actually get the material ourselves, and what we did is we went online. I don't know if people know Alibaba.com, but Alibaba is a sort of a place for if you need something and you can find it. Alibaba typically has it. It's typically comes out of China, and it's sort of a dating site for architects who need stuff. We typed in ring mesh. This came out. It was this is in Anping in China, and we started to chat with them because all these people have like a Skype account. Funny enough, the Skype name of this lady representing them was called Ring, and so we were Skyping with Ring for a long time. And after a while, they sent us this mock-up, which we thought was promising, this sample. And as it happens also with online dating, at some point you need to go and visit them in real life. So we went to Anping in China. And we ended up, this is 5 hours west of Beijing, in this very small town where you can buy dog from the street. And we ended up in this very small, super small courtyard, I would say half the size of this courtyard. And there was our sample in the corner. They were just done, and they were going to sleep. And all the way in the back, this is their main production line, which is the sort of deep frying gear. And all the way in the back was this one guy who, by himself, was welding this stuff together. This is the moment when Jing, my partner, explained that we needed 600,000 rings. This is our engineer from front, and the two of us had guaranteed that we would be able to supply this material, but it was also the realization there that we had it was going to be very hard to actually fulfill that promise. Luckily, it ended up that Anping was a town where there were many more aggressive companies as well, and so we took the sample and went to another company and said, sure, we can do this. Mike was happy because these guys supplied also to larger orders, international orders, and so this other company ended up making it, and we could start production, which is currently going on. There's a large mock-up at the end of the month in Hong Kong. And so this is a few pictures of construction. This is at the beginning of this year, and more recent. There, maybe you saw this curved staircase. Our Korean contractor decided to make a Richard Serra sculpture, basically to just pour the concrete in. This is formwork, which was then thrown out. I was quite surprised by sort of their the effort they took to make this. This is a few weeks ago. And so this will be done by the end of this year. On our way back from Beijing, from Anping, we stopped in Beijing, and they asked us to look at this one space. This is a temporary pavilion, our third project that we'll show. Get It Louder is a sort of biennial organized in China, where they bring a lot of, it's Oning is the curator. He brings basically hundreds of artists, performers, and other people together to discuss art. His real objective is to create a more theoretical discourse in China, where art is mostly at this moment sort of linked to design and sort of a commercial type of thinking, and he's trying to establish a more critical dialogue as well. He asked us to participate in this third version, and they were taking over this Kengo Kuma designed new shopping center and office center, which wasn't open yet, and they thought they'd bring in this event to start to draw people in. We were not so interested in taking over, empty retail space, especially a lot of these architectural installations. They indeed take up. Anyway, there was no budget, and there was no real other idea, but we asked, can we not make a space that you actually will need? Can we not make the hub or some sort of central thing that they could need? And we said, well, why don't we do something there? They said, that's a good idea, let us think about it. This was 4 weeks before it would open. And a week later they said, so what is your idea? And we said, well, you didn't ask us to actually do this. And he said, yeah, and by the way, it became a competition. But it said, yeah, but I'm sure you have thought of something. And we had indeed thought of something, and we had made a little model, which was basically sort of a pavilion that building on what we had done for PS1 would be sort of constantly moving, and as people sort of occupy the space, the shape of this thing would transform. And they said, that's great. And the next day we got an email from an engineering firm that said, regarding the pavilion there and there and there, it doesn't work because it's unsafe. We propose to do this and this and this, and we're going to make this, thank you, and they built it. And so they said, but it also rains here, and the pavilion actually needs to be used for movie screening and lectures. So we need to cover it as well. And do you have an idea? Because we're opening in 3 weeks, and so we thought maybe we can keep some of this idea of sort of this unstable pavilion by actually planning it with sort of a skin that would be constantly moving by wind, sort of a hinging connection, or a hinging set of leaves that would be activated by the wind. It needed to not be climatized, it could be very light. They said, a great idea. They said, we have 12 colors you can choose from. We suggest you choose these 3 because they look sort of metally. And then we thought, well, how often do you have a chance to make a pink building? So we said, no, do these 3. And we would like to see a mock-up, because we had sort of sent the detail of how this thing would be hinging and connecting, but they sent it back. I'm saying, it's too expensive, it's not going to work, we're not going to do this, is water going to come in, thanks. And we're going to use tie wraps, so they used tie wraps. And we said, sure, that might as well. Can you send us can you make a mock-up? We would like to see what it would look like. I said, why do you need a mock-up? Why don't you come to the opening? Because we actually built the thing already. And it was the only time that somebody said, let me see if this movie now plays here. Yeah. I've never seen a pink building be so contextual. This shows the thing. Sorry, it's a little bit low res because it was taken on the phone. I never ended up seeing the building at all. Actually, it was demolished within 6 weeks. But here you can see quite nice how the thing actually moves. In the next year you see it. So the idea was also that because it's actually a pavilion that moved from Shanghai, from Beijing to Shanghai to Guangzhou. We wanted to use its reflection as a way to also incorporate the surroundings itself within sort of the appearance of the building. So, and the fact that it was sort of faceted and low res, created sort of this fragmentation of its context, which was an integral part of the architectural appearance. So. This is the first time I'm showing this project. This is something that I'm going to show 2 recent projects. This is one of them, which not this project, not this work, but because when you see this, you think this is terrible kitsch. It's a Meissen porcelain, and when we saw this for the first time, we also thought this is incredibly, almost like a visceral reaction of I don't know how many people sort of emotionally reacted bad to this image. We were approached by a new director of a new art space in the Netherlands, and he said, I want to show this in a contemporary arts environment. I'm not teaming up with Meissen. Meissen is the porcelain factory that has been around for 250 years, one of the earlier porcelain companies. But I want to have people look at this in a different way, have them not have this reaction that you had, that this is kitsch and we can't do anything about it. Because actually, if you look carefully, there's an incredible detail, there's an incredible refinement, there's an incredible craft, and it's also qualities that are actually lost in these days. So are you interested in taking on this challenge, literally? And so the question was, can we come up with something that makes people look differently at this stuff? The other limitations were that people needed to be able to get close to it, because you need to see the detail, but they couldn't touch it. A lot of this work is extremely expensive, so we needed to come up with a way to, say, control the proximity of people. The Meissen work comes from a very Baroque time and after Rococo era, in which through an incredible amount of detail, an incredible amount of, say, fuzz, in a way, sort of this total environment was created. And we were interested actually in finding a way in which these things could not be seen as objects, because we thought actually the fact that they are objects makes them sort of kitschy, but at the moment that they become part of sort of a larger environment, maybe, and sort of, can we create a collection of details, like a series of fragments of details, rather than these things as individual objects? Maybe then people start relating to it differently. And so we took sort of cue from a different era of German intensity, which is expressionism, as a way in which sort of the subject or the object and the environment blend. And so the first thing we came up with is, because it needed to be casework, because people needed to come close, but it was not about display, it was actually about filtering. We tried to see, can we use the display case as a filter, as something that fragments the work, and indeed makes it a collection of details that, and these individual details get highlighted, rather than showing this thing as an object. In Canal Street, in Chinatown, they sell this very kitschy porcelain, and so we used that to test on, and we started to think of ways to use the casework itself as a filter rather than as a way to display. So something that hides and actually breaks up rather than displays. And so we came up with sort of this string of fractal caseworks that could be, because the curator was also very interested in being able to show these things individually, but we wanted to also show them as an environment and as a series, and through this system you could make sort of spaces and environments, and at the same time you could still read them as sort of individuals. This is looking down. There were 50 objects we needed to show. We made 30 cases, some of them combined them. We then, so this is colored acrylic. We fabricated them in the Netherlands to a very tight detail, prefabricated, and then they were shipped. And here you see the installation. This was all. This happened actually 3 weeks ago, and here you see the result of it. And so you see that through the reflection and, in a way, the refraction, these things start to not only be sort of single objects, but also start to blend into some more diffuse environment. You suddenly see the reflection of a bicycle or something in there. And the funny thing is, these are two of the main collectors. They were completely excited about this new way of showing it, and this is a temporary installation, but it might have sort of an afterlife now that they want to take over all the casework and use it for the display of their own stuff. And this is the work on the ceiling. Funniest thing is, when speaking to the curator, this is actually the most expensive piece of porcelain in the world. Jeff Koons' work, so still, I think the contemporary art version does it better than the traditional porcelain. This is a project competition we just won. I'm going to go to, so this is actually the first time we're showing it to anybody, because nobody knows. And I still have to sign the contract on Tuesday, so who knows, maybe this is the last time also we can show this. A community center in front of, at the Belgian coast, Wulpen, a very, very small town with a very strong community and club tradition. Wulpen is part of a much larger town called Kokzijde, and I don't know if people know the Belgian coast, but the Belgian coast is one of the most urbanized coasts in Europe, where actually there's sort of a continuous stream of, 10-story apartments from the north to the south. They're also making a tram line now. And it's still rapidly expanding, mostly for second homes, holiday homes, and there's very sort of temporary community sense that in the summer it's a much more fluid and unstable type of community, and the events that are happening there, are sort of event-based and season-based. The town is very ambitious. I think Stephen Hall's building like a casino not much further down there, and also this town is very ambitious, and they wanted to have a big new icon for their little hamlet, which is Wulpen, which is part of this community. So there's about 30,000 people living in this large town, and this is a kilometer down inward, and they only have 500 people living here, but these 500 people together have 30 clubs and communities, which is the Bridge Club, the Poker Club, the the Bow and Arrow Club, and etc. So there's a very incredibly strong sense of community, and there's also very our sort of reading of this was that we should not build something new and very aggressive. There's actually only 3 key buildings in that town that sort of define its identity, which is the church, which is a beautiful church, and then the old house of the priest, which was used as the community center, but now became a bar, and the old school. So this is sort of the character of the town. This is the church. Here you see the old house of the priest. This represents sort of the new ambition of the city to sort of have this be an area of high design, and then the old school. And so the scope was to demolish the school and the tree, and built a new icon for the town. But we thought this community actually only exists of people that still live there. It's not a growing community. And so most of these people must have gone to this school. This is an old school picture. This is a more recent school picture. You see, obviously the community is shrinking, but probably every single person who's a member of this club has been to this school and has memories to this school. So very early on we decided to keep the school. Here's the old house, which I'm not showing, the church, and the school itself. And we decided to keep the school and basically gut the entire interior of the school. And what is important also as a historic typology, this is one of the only old schools in Belgium where there is the teacher's house and the classrooms behind it. That's one building. That was a unique typology. So we decided to keep the school, put most of the program in there, and actually have, this was the first time we could make a building that was both in the center of town and at the periphery of the town. And so we decided to have sort of the additional spaces that came out sort of free up from the center of town and project themselves towards the landscape. So we made a very precise sort of insertion. We tried to define the space of this beautiful old tree that was around it, and then have sort of the additional program, which I will get to on the other side. So the street line continues, and you open actually through the courtyard into the space. So here you come through this wall, which is an exterior wall, and right there where we make this insertion is where you enter the building. The program is very straightforward. It's a multi-purpose room and offices and a toilet and storage. So come in here, enter here through the vestibule, the meeting rooms in the old teacher's house, the bar, which also functions as the entrance sort of control, the multi-purpose room, restrooms, storage, and sort of a space to circulate the old school. And this is all exterior but covered sort of walkway. And the youth, because the youth needs to be part of the community but also wants to be able to be free. So, this shows the old people dancing and debating. And then the youth space, which is sort of the 10 to 20-year-olds. We wanted them to be part of the community, but also have sort of a sense of freedom and independence. So they are sort of coming out of this wall, and the area around it is left wild and for them to explore. But most important, obviously, is actually the old schoolyard that we're trying to reframe, with also the relation to the church as a space for the community to happen. So we're very excited because this is our second building that we are hopefully building now. So let's see if I can sign that contract on Tuesday. Last project I will show is actually our first project, and maybe brings us a little bit back to where we started. This is a house upstate New York. I don't know if people know New York, but New York, Manhattan has two rivers, the Hudson River and the East River. The Hudson River has a beautiful Hudson Valley, where also, for instance, the Dia Beacon is, and it's basically a beautiful area to enjoy nature, and some people who can afford it live there. And here we were asked to design a house for a true modernist, his weekend house up in the hills, sort of overlooking the Hudson Valley. Very rocky site on a ridge with beautiful nature. This is our client, Ivan Chermayev. Ivan Chermayev is the son of Sergei Chermayev, a quite well-known modernist architect, and he is a graphic designer. And at the end of his life, he had saved enough money and asked us to make this weekend house for him. And he, you might know from some of the logos in the 70s, he's the ones that turned sort of the more, say, Americana style logos into, say, international modernist style. He also did like Chase Bank, and he's very much the one designer who was instrumental in sort of shaping the identity of corporate America in a way. He asked us to, he was very influenced, his dad was very good friends with Breuer, and he actually asked us to make a Breuer house. He wanted to have a glass box, a modernist box that was implanted in nature, sort of controlling nature. He wanted to cut very specifically certain trees, and it was very much about sort of us being in control of our destiny. And we proposed a, coming back to our initial PS1 story, a more loose, a more flexible, a more fluid, and a more maybe humble type of modernity, in the sense that we broke down the box and we sort of distributed through the site and had it, the edges of the box that's become weak and sort of react to views and other environmental conditions. Every time when we came with the drawings, he asked us for, he said, give me the drawings, and then he took a sketch roll and he started to make all the curves straight. He once called me and said, Florian, happy Thanksgiving, and I got rid of those goddamn curves. And so it was very much about sort of the, being in control. The house, as a real modernist house, has every function in its own box, and consists of completely solid and completely open series of boxes. So there's always sort of this openness towards the context. Ivan himself would collage stones that he had found on the site into the facades. They're very heroic. And here you see sort of the closed boxes and the glass boxes. You enter here underneath. This is sort of the big central living kitchen. Here the library, living room, guest room, maybe sort of help room. His studio there where he could still work. Bathroom and master bedroom. His second wife, because this was built together with his second wife, could still walk stairs. So for her we made a little tower so she could escape him in the tower and have her own quiet space. And here you see this sort of different framing of the environment in these different spaces. And ultimately, the most fantastic bath, even for somebody who's 80, to be in nature without having to be seen.